So thank you all for joining. And I'll formally open the meeting, but good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Council meeting of Tuesday, the 21st of April, 2020. Please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and the video will be publicly available on YouTube. Members, as said before, please speak clearly, one speaker at a time, and please keep your microphones on mute when not talking. Thank you very much. I'll call for any apologies. I don't believe there are any. Nothing in the public forum, excuse me. Acceptance of late items. There are 3 reports included in the late agenda for this meeting. These reports are late due to the need to respond quickly to a range of complex issues arising from COVID-19 and require decisions that cannot be delayed until the next council meeting. So the recommendations are that the following late items be included in this agenda, a separate agenda that you will have access to for your consideration. Firstly, the Chief Executive's report. Secondly, the COVID-19 Council Financial Relief Measures report. And lastly, the New Zealand Local Government Funding Agency amendments. We will get to those in a second. I don't believe there's any confidential business to be transferred into the open, as far as I'm aware.
I'm happy to move, Tembury, that they are accepted, the late items.
Thank you, Larry. That's very good of you. Thank you very much. Can I get a seconder for that, please?
Prepared to second.
Thank you very much, Steve. Very good. That's number 5, all done and dusted. Thank you very much for that. Confirmation of minutes, declaration of conflicts of interest. Are there any declarations of conflict that anyone wants to highlight? Thank you, members. Deputations present.
Sorry, Temby, the motion to receive the late items wasn't put and voted on.
Sorry, I thought we'd done that with Larry jumping the gun on it, but I'm happy to do it.
Had a seconder, but it
I
wasn't.
beg your pardon. Sorry, John. I do beg your pardon. You're quite right. So, in terms of Larry and Steve, Larry moving it and Steve seconding it, can I get all those in favour to move that the Chief Executive's report, the COVID-19 Council Financial Relief Measures report, and the New Zealand Local Government Funding Agency amendments become business items 4 and 5 following the draft annual report for COVID-19? I'll have to go through somewhat laboriously. I will have to go through a roll call for this so we don't have any misinterpretations. So, Jaco.
Aye.
Larry, obviously.
Aye.
Kelvin.
Aye.
Bill.
Aye.
Andrew.
Aye.
Heidi.
Aye.
Dawn.
Yes.
Steve, thank you. You as seconder, we will take that for granted. Thank you very much. John.
Aye.
And Tina.
Aye.
And it's an aye from me. John, thank you for picking that up. Much appreciated. The motion is carried. Sorry, back to declaration of conflicts of interest. Were there any? Thank you, members. Deputations present.
Sorry, Mayor Temby, can I just interrupt? We also need to do the change to the order of business, just to get that order established before we go too much further.
Okay, Robin, thank you. I thought I'd covered that as well. So in terms of the order, the first item will be the Chief Executive's report, followed by the COVID-19 Council Financial Relief Measures report, followed again by the New Zealand Local Government Funding Agencies report, which becomes the business items 4 and 5. Is that established, that, Robin, in your mind?
Yes, I think I can bring up the suggested order if people would like to see that on the screen so everyone knows what order it's going to go in.
If you could, Robin, I'm happy to read it out, but this is 10.1 to 10.8. If you could bring it up, that would be really helpful.
Sorry, try again. Share. There. Are people able to see that on their screens?
Yes. Scroll down a little bit or up. Yep. Yep. I'm happy to move that, Mayor Temby.
Yeah, and Temby, I'll second it and just suggest that with a motion like that, just all those in favour, aye, and all those against, no. If there's no no's, then we wouldn't need the roll call. We'll save a little bit of time.
All right,
Yeah.
just being, thank you, Larry. I will do that in the future. I was being a bit pedantic in the circumstances of a new technology and just making sure there was no misunderstanding. Can I just check? Sorry, just a quick tech question. How do you get rid of the toolbar in the middle of the screen? Does anybody know?
You just pass the cursor over the top of the screen and it's a floating toolbar, so it comes up.
Yeah, it's not floating. I've already tried that, John. Anyway, sorry. Well, I'll play with that as we get into the meeting. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Kelvin. Thank you, and Larry. Thank you for that. So all in favour in terms of the order, changing the order of business, say aye.
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 Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you, members. That's carried. Now, lastly, again, declarations of conflict of interest. Are there any? Excuse me. Thank you very much. Deputations, presentations, and petitions are nil. Recommendations from other committees are nil, which moves us on to serial 10, which is business. And I'll ask the Chief Executive to take us through his report, please. Thank you, Marty.
Thank you, Your Worship and councillors. I'm pleased to present this report, which to a degree substitutes the General Manager's reports that you would normally receive through the Projects and Services Committee. So you'll note that there is two recommendations, one to receive the report, the other is to approve the funding contribution of $350,000 to support the next phase of work required for the Memorial Park development, the Aquatics and Recreation Centre there. So I'm happy to speak further to that at the time, and if you wish, we can just work through the report page by page, if that would suit. Guided by you, Your Worship, page 1.
Yes, thank you, Marty. Just try to find the unmute button. Members, I'll take your lead on this. If you'd like Marty to go through specific things, may I suggest that questions are asked at this time of the Chief Executive.
Yeah, good plan.
Are we going page by page, Temby?
Well, I thought rather than go page by page, John, we just ask for those that have a particular interest, if they could ask questions of this issue.
I have a
I'll
question.
just take the report as read and happy to answer any questions.
Mayor Temby, would you prefer that we write in the meeting chat just to signal whether we want a question?
You can do, Steve.
Okay.
I think it might be easier just to
shout it out. Is that easy?
Shout, I can't see. Sorry about the lack of my knowledge on this technology. I can't see a method to hold a hand up. Is there such a thing?
Not yet.
No.
Not yet. Okay.
Should we just do a shout out if we're?
I have a
think
question on paragraph 88. If I could kick it off, it's the last paragraph on your report there, Marty. I was just wondering, it's the Wolf Street upgrade.
88.
And, yeah, paragraph 88. Is it possible for construction to begin during level 3 to minimise the impacts on those businesses when we get to level 2 and they can open up again? I know at level 4 we couldn't, but it did mention that some construction can start under level 3.
So, just to be clear, this is serial 88 on page 15.
Look,
Yes.
the answer is yes. The answer is yes. It would be my expectation that they could commence. Construction, I've just spoken with Brett Nichols, obviously of the farmers, involved with the farmers development. He advises me that the crews of Hawkins are going to be on site and underway as of Tuesday. So I imagine a development like that would also be one that could commence.
And I can just add that so can I, in terms of a meeting happening this morning. The key thing we're trying to understand at the moment is which businesses are planning to open so that we can manage the works on the street in a way that has the least possible impact on the businesses that are planning to open, but definitely planning to get to construction as soon as possible next week.
Yeah,
Tim, I have a question.
Yes, thank you, John. Go ahead.
Or if you, so through you, obviously, to Marty, the Urban Form and Transport Initiative, when is that coming before the councillors for councillors' endorsement? Because we're getting quite tight in terms of time, so there's been quite a bit of work there. When is that coming to council for council to endorse it, the councillors?
Look, I understand that it may well go to Cabinet in June, so obviously it's going to be within the next 4 to 6 weeks, but Christine may be able to update.
So we would be bringing it once there's further work done on the preferred option. So at the moment, the project team are working through the 4 options that were put out for consultation, and then from there selecting a way forward. It's probably going to be a mixture of all of those. And at that point, once that's been worked through, that's when we would have sufficient information to come to council. Some of the technical reports are going to be released on the UFTI website. You'll be receiving something today informally, and then it's going to be publicly available towards the by tomorrow. So that's the technical work that flows into it. But in terms of the overall, it's likely to be in May.
Very good, Christine. Members, any questions of Christine on what she just said? Thank you. And any more questions of Marty on the Chief Executive's report generally?
I have a question, Mayor.
I've got a question. After you, Steve.
Steve, followed by, I think, was that Tina?
Heidi.
Heidi. Steve, followed by Heidi. Thank you.
Thank you. 2 questions. One on Memorial Park. And I note that there's the word imminently is used. That's paragraph 32 on page 8. That work needs to begin imminently in order to meet the shovel-ready deadline by May next year. I'm just wondering whether we could buy ourselves a month or two's leeway in that regard while we get a better understanding of the Crown Infrastructure Partners' position. And I also note that in the CIP applications, our colleagues in the Western Bay put Rangiuru Business Park in there, which I would anticipate would be far beyond May in terms of being shovel ready. But that being said, can we not defer that till we get some greater certainty?
Well, you can. Yes, you can. But that's not our recommendation. We believe that this is a piece of work that needs to be done regardless of whether or not our application to the CIP is successful or not. And we believe that obviously if we the sooner we move this piece of work forward, the higher chance there is of not only it being picked up by the CIP, but also being able to be shovel ready within the period required.
And Marty, just to add to that, this of course strategically is all part of the intensification of Te Papa and having a greater population base living in the area, and in future years and decades having access to an amenity which is going to become very important to the city.
That's great.
Steve, thank you. Did that satisfy your question?
Yes, thank you. The second one was on Wharf Street and kind of tied into Councillor Tina's question. Are we just doing just a quick double check with the retailers and owners down there around how the current operating environment is going to impact them? Because we're talking about construction lasting into summer. And if we get into level 2 in 3 weeks or so, they'll be quite keen to make some hay. And I'm just concerned about construction disruption to business in the current operating environment. So have we done another quick check-in on them on that?
Yes, that's happening right now.
Thank you, Gareth. Thanks, Marty. Thanks, Timmy.
Thank you, Steve, and others. Heidi.
Hello, hi. So just in regard to the pool project, the pool project, I can understand the urgency based on the funding that we're looking at with government, but I just wonder, it's a $90 million project. If we don't have that kind of urgency, have we really done the work around what the benefit analysis of that in comparison to a $19 million spend into Papa Peninsula to increase intensification? I mean, you know, comparatively to what, for what, and based on the for well-being. So what are the social, environmental, cultural, you know, what kind of work have we done to analyze that? It seems that it's all been sitting in the venues team, but it hasn't really been put into our whole portfolio place. Has that work been done? So I'm happy to, oh, do you want to go, Marty?
No, you go, Christine. I think we're going to say the same thing.
Okay, so there has been a community facility needs analysis completed, and that did identify that this was one of the higher priority pieces of work or physical work that needed to happen, and I think that has been reported to you. What we're suggesting here is that you invest in this planning, and what we're saying is if it doesn't proceed with CIP, that work is not lost. So it's not going to be aborted cost. It'll really be a question of when is the timing right, and either some external funder, a council funder, or a proportional shared funding, but you're going to need this work done, and then you can make a decision in subsequent years as to what the funding would be, but it wouldn't be lost work.
Thank you.
Yeah, Tembi, I have another question.
Oh, sorry, I had two questions.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, I forgot about the second one. Just the Waiari project, if we're going out for tender, what does that mean if we don't get funding from government and we don't have the ability to pay for that through our annual plan process? Does that put us at risk there, or is that not, does that not bind us to anything?
Going out for tender doesn't bind us to anything. Obviously, if we sign a contract with someone, it does. And I would imagine that at the time that we're required to sign a contract, we'll have a much better understanding of what our financial position and our capital project is going to look like for next financial year.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. John, your question?
Yeah, Marty, it sort of runs across a couple of areas, so it's not one specific paragraph, but the applications we put in have been accompanied normally by a CapEx figure, but the OpEx implications of a lot of the projects we've applied for aren't specified in our application documents, and whatever the public can see, they have no idea of what the OpEx implications are of some of these capital projects. I'm just wondering if there's some work being done to address that information shortfall. It's the same information shortfall we have in our AP financial information document.
Yeah, John, look, we discussed this yesterday as a team, and for us to go through and do that exercise for every capital project or program that forms part of the CIP is a huge piece of work. I think the best thing that we can do is to wait and see whether we get an early indication from the Crown Infrastructure Partnership as to what projects are likely, and then at that point in time we can then perhaps do that deep dive into understanding the operational costs, which then again will lead to the viability of actually us even picking up projects should they be successful. So just because the Crown, I think, may offer to fund some particular projects, there's still obviously a decision-making process by us to be made as to whether or not operationally we can sustain and afford it.
Can I follow up, Tembi? Is there some reputational risk with that approach, Marty, in the sense that, you know, we get permission to do a project, we then look at the implications of it, we then say, no, we can't swallow this. And the supplementary is, would we have that information before we do our AP?
Well, firstly, I think the application was coached with a very clear picture of our financial position. So in considering any of these applications, those considering them will well be aware of our current financial position and the loss of revenue in the order of an estimated 50 to 70 million. So we've made it very clear that there needs to be a two-way conversation about the uptake or otherwise of any money from the CIP. And the second part of your question
was, would we have the numbers in time for our AP discussions, particularly, and I was supposedly foreshadowing something here, if we go like Auckland does to a July 31 deadline rather than a June 30 deadline, which I think would be smart, frankly. But will we have the numbers before those AP discussions?
I would like to think so, otherwise we won't be in a position to be making informed decisions. And yeah.
Thank you.
If questions have finished, Mayor Temby, I'm happy to move recommendations A and B.
Yeah, sorry, Larry, just Taiho. I've just got some questions coming in the sidebar here. Dawn, firstly you, and then Paul, yes. I think you wanted to comment, and then Heidi has another question.
Yeah, I'm fine. John asked my question. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Dawn. Paul, did you want to make a comment on something there?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in addition to Marty's comments, we've been just talking about the implications, and I can talk to it further in the future paper around the annual plan. But we're most likely to be in a situation where we may need to reconsult as well, due to the implications of that Crown Investment Partners program being successful or not. So at that point, we will need to be looking at more of those whole of life costs at that point as well.
Great, thanks, Paul. Thank you very much. Heidi, you had a question?
God, this is tricky. I'm trying to flick between both of them. Sorry. So I have a question, and it's just looking at page 17, number 8, I think. No, number 7, sorry. So just talking about going through a recovery plan with priority 1 and your business partners, have we got a set of outcomes that are holistic across the 4 wellbeings in regard to this, or are we purely looking at economics here?
No, we're not. We are looking at the social and cultural well-being as well, and so you would have received as a late item this document here, which I think talks about assist business and community in the short term, and so this isn't simply just a business support plan. It takes into account social, community and not-for-profit organisations and how we can work in that situation with TECT and Bay Trust to support those agencies.
There's a couple of there's environment is one of the wellbeings and cultural, and I'm just what kind of measurement or what kind of how are we really showing those outcomes? Are we really clearly looking at those 4 outcomes and seeing how this all relates into them? Because I can't so far find that that's being done in a clear and consistent way. Have we got some way that we can do that, or is that something that we could look towards being a little bit more intentional about?
Heidi, I just want to establish your question properly in everyone's minds. You're talking about putting a rule, if I understand you, putting a rule of social, economic, cultural, environmental, the 4 well-beings over every decision. Is that what you're saying you're not seeing clearly here?
That's right, and yep. Based on in the context of the Living Standards Framework, which is what the government wants us to is assessing our criteria on anyway. It's just that clarity around each of those, because what I've really noticed is that the environment conversation, the explanation gets dropped off in this. The cultural explanation not really kind of addressed very well. Social is getting stronger and stronger, and we're starting to do a really good job of that. And obviously economic is where the space of that numbers we understand fairly quickly. So it's just how do we then make sure that we're looking at all those together?
Okay, so Marty, the question is around putting I think if I understand it, putting a rule of measure around the full wellbeing over every decision.
Yeah, look, I think that's a very good point. So you'll notice that that's a draft recovery plan. And so I think that the purpose of putting it in front of you today is, I think, to signal to you that the plan is well underway to being developed and that we will be seeking your feedback today and over the next week or so, just to firm that plan up. And so the points that you make are taken on board.
Thank you.
All right, Marty, thank you. Hi, Christine. I think you wanted to make a comment on timeframes for the AP.
So yes, just the executive team are looking at that annual plan timing. So there was some reference to a 31st July date. So we note that the current annual plan that's been out for consultation is unlikely to be able to adopt it in its current form because we don't have the fiscal capacity anymore to deliver that. So it's going to be modified in some form and, as has been already noted, needs to be reconsulted. So we're just working through what those timeframes might look like as an executive team, and we'll report back to council once we've worked that through. Just while I've got the talking stick, the other point, just to respond to the question that Councillor Hughes has asked. So you will recall that we had started a process to create a bit of a vision. So what did council see as the outcomes that we wanted to deliver, or that the councillors wanted to deliver for the community? And that's where we saw the council would make a call collectively about what did they think was important in terms of social, economic, cultural and environmental, and then we could use that framework in decision making. And so at the moment we actually don't have a council view on what you want to achieve in each of those areas and the balance and mix of those. So that piece of work had commenced. It's just been put on hold through COVID, and we do intend to restart that process. And then once we've got that, that will be able to then be looked at each time we're making decisions as to how the recommendations and the assessments are measuring up against what the council has set for the direction it wants to follow.
Great, Christine. I think that I'm really heartened by that. I think having the full wellbeings as an overview and as an overlay against decision making is a pretty healthy process. So thank you for that. Jaco, you have a question.
Just a quick one. Looking at the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development inviting growth councils to apply for funding for various projects.
So sorry, could you repeat the question, please? I just had trouble hearing.
Yeah, Jaco, we can. You're freezing a bit too. I just wonder if your Wi-Fi connection's as good as it could be, but if you could turn your mic up a bit, maybe we can hear you a bit better as well.
Yeah, I'll try to move the mic close to my mouth. I was just wondering if there's been a media announcement or a media release for the $3 billion worth of projects we applied for to the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, which is on the draft recovery plan.
Marty, were you able to hear Jaco?
Yeah. I think the question was whether or not there's been a press statement in relation to the information and bids we put forward to Ministry of Housing and Urban Development to support the growth projects, particularly out east and out west. The answers, I think, they're all bundled up. Whilst they might be separate, they're all included in commentary around the projects that we put forward in the CIP. I don't know that we necessarily publicly distinguished between the CIP application and those that were made by the Growth Council. So, but Christine, are you able to just clarify that?
You just echo what you're saying. So the CIP process had two streams within it. One was around creating communities and housing for all, and the other one was employing our people. And that had a media release around it. The creating communities and housing for all picked up on the urban growth transformational projects, but only in respect of those that were shovel ready in the next 6 to 12 months. So that's really where the focus was, those things that we could proceed with reasonably quickly. So that has been covered in the media releases. We're looking to do some further disclosures of this as well on our website, and I think that work is underway at the moment in the comms team.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jaco. Councillors, are there any further questions about the Chief Executive's report? That being the case, on your agendas, Hello?
Yeah, look, it is worth noting that whilst I think informally and through the media, it's been reported to council that the Bayfair underpass is something that is going to proceed. I think it's just worth noting the effort that council as a whole and councillors individually made in terms of ensuring that that underpass is something that was retained as part of that project. So I think it's worth council noting that in particular.
Tenby, I've got a question. So
carry on, John.
Yeah, follow up to Jaco's really. When can we is it possible to just put the application, various documents in the public domain so people can see it? Because I mean, the reality is it was a $3 billion request, and the CIP project was significantly narrower than that. As Christine explained, narrower time frame, narrow focus, but that number's enormous, and I think it would be really good if we could get those documents in the public domain ASAP. Is there any reason why they couldn't be done? I'm sure they're discoverable under the Lagoima anyway, so.
So just in response to that, there are a few confidential elements and probably 2 or 3 of the actual bids. But we could, if we just removed those or deleted those those confidential aspects, then it could move into a public arena.
Thank you.
Great, John, thank you. I totally agree with that. I think the sooner that's understood and we're telling the story around what we're trying to achieve here and enable people to understand and be able to comment on it better. Yeah, where are we? I don't believe I've got any more questions in the sidebar.
I have one, Tenby.
It's Andrew, is it? Sorry, I can't
see
you. Got you now. Thank
you. Yeah, just through you to CEO, just looking at MB's endorsed our procedures and practices. Is that an official thing, the MB endorsement, now that we've cleared off the 12 issues that they'd raised, 10 areas that they'd raised? I just want to see if that's been officially endorsed.
Yes, it is. We've received a letter from MB. So about September, October last year, both MB and IANZ, which is the accreditation agency for New Zealand, they both came in and audited us. MB was primarily in relation to the report that they did around the Bella Vista, and there were a couple of outstanding action points that needed to be done, and they've just signed off on all of those action points. So we have a letter that I believe we could circulate to you if that's what you wish.
Oh, it was just the word endorsed often means there's a letter or a certificate or a prize or something like that. So I was just happy to know that that's an official thing. It removes some risk, which is pretty happy. Thanks.
Yeah, we'll take it as a prize. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty.
Yeah, I did have a final question, Mayor Temby. Yeah,
go ahead. I'm very slow to get off my one screen and back onto the mic, Mike.
Thank you. So this is a question to Marty or Alan Lightbourne. Just wanting to reference paragraph 68 to 72 on our strategic finance project. First of all, congratulations for the whole team on going live on that, through such difficult circumstances. So first of all, I think that accolades are due. And I just wanted to know what is the next sort of steps in this project? What are the next steps in this project, given that we've come this far?
Well, it's the training and the rollout, the live rollout and use of it. And so whilst we know that the system works, now as an organisation, we need to upskill the organisation and use it in a live sense. But Alan, you may wish to expand.
Yeah, thanks, Marty. I think Marty covered a couple of the points. The other one that we need to do is, while the platform's technically live, because we haven't started using it, we haven't migrated any of the data from the old platform into the new one. So that's probably the biggest technical hurdle that's left to go, get the data out of the old system, stick it in the new one and start running them side by side. The desire at the moment is to try and go live in July, just working with both the organisation and our providers to make sure that's doable. One of the big things that will drive that timing is when we will get out of lockdown and when the organisation can kind of resume some form of normal operation. So there's a few dependencies there we just need to drop into place.
Okay, thanks very much for that update. Appreciate
it. Thanks very much, Alan. Councillors, any more questions on the Chief Executive's report? They're being done. I just would like to acknowledge the work that Gareth and his team have done in collaboration with iwi, with the contractors, with other council staff, and indeed with councillors on bringing the Moal base track job that we know now to have been finalised at $675,223. A great result, Gareth. Your leadership is, we're very grateful for your leadership, and I just wanted to make that very public here today. So thanks so much for all you've done, and the much wider team, including iwi, as I said.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely team effort.
Yep, indeed. There being no further questions, councillors, I'll put to you that we received the Chief Executive's report and also approved the funding of $350,000 for the expenditure in the 21-22 financial year for the next phase of the Memorial Park, the Memorial Park Recreation and Leisure Project, subject to Bay Venues Limited securing the remaining $350,000 from TECT.
Happy to second that, Mayor Tamby.
Thank you, Larry. Sorry, who is...
Can we take that in parts?
Yes, we can take it in parts if you like. So firstly, Part A, which is the reception of the Chief Executive's report. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Any against? Carried, thank you. And then B, and sorry, who's moving this?
You just did.
Okay, great. All righty, just making sure. And you're seconding it. So this is now B. All those in favour?
Aye.
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 Aye from me. All those against?
No.
No from you, Steve. It's councillors Morris. Who was the second one? Sorry.
Hollis.
Any other? Sorry, Mayor Tenby. We didn't actually have a debate on that B, and there may be some people who would like to have a say on it, elected members.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
All right. Sorry. Again, I thought we're doing that as part of the questions of the Chief Executive.
Sorry, I didn't get the impression we were debating, particularly the Memorial Park project. So some elected members may want to have a word on that.
All right, let's do that. So, councillors, we have here before us the funding contribution in relation to Memorial Park, as you can read before you.
Yeah, seconder, I'll speak to it, Tammy, if you like.
Thank you, Larry.
First, look, and I would comment that the Chief Executive's report is very full and well received, and does indicate that Council is working very hard behind the scenes in very trying circumstances. So I hope the public are encouraged that we're doing all we can at the moment to keep things moving forward and prepare for recovery. The 350,000, I believe we should approve today, is a bring forward, and it is just one of the things that we're doing ahead of the annual plan, but it's necessary for the reasons that are outlined in the report. The real impact of it, total rates impact, is 14,000. As the report says, it won't be money wasted even if the CIP application doesn't come through, because this is inevitably going to be a project we will address in the long-term plan next year, and the work that's being done now to prepare it to be shovel ready will also help inform us with some more data and information in regard to the project, should it be left to the long-term plan sometime within 10 years. I know I'm only one voice here, but I'm fully convinced that such a project is necessary in the next 10 years, at least, in our city, if we are going to make progress on intensification through the Te Papa Peninsula and seeing a lot more people living in the CBD, which we often refer to as the forgotten suburb of our city, which has potential to house a lot more people. So I hope we will endorse this, support it, and allow it to go on to the next stage. Thank you.
Larry, thank you. And can I just add, I'm not going to repeat what Larry said. I agree with it entirely. The only thing I will say is coming out of of a situation such as COVID-19 has been, and as hard as it will be on the city going forward for the next 24 months or so, we must be forward looking at the same time. And I agree entirely with Larry that the intensification plans for Te Papa will mean a greater population, and we must have amenities to service that population as we look forward. So happy to take debate and commentary on this. Thank you, councillors.
Yeah, I'd like to have a go.
Andrew, thank you. If you want to just list, before Andrew speaks, just put your questions, if you will, or you want to ask a question down on the side, and I'll see it there now. Thank you, Andrew. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that it may well be inevitable, but that doesn't necessarily mean immediate. And I think that with the changes that are happening every week at the moment, another month isn't going to make terribly much difference to whether we just hold fire on spending $350,000. And while it might only affect the ratepayers by 14,000, it doesn't mean that we need to rush. And ensuring that this thing is shovel ready will still happen in June as easily as it will in May. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Steve, you're next. Thank you.
Thank you. I agree with the comments and the statement from Chief Executive and others around this being required at some stage. That's a certainty. However, for me, I would like further certainty in terms of the Crown Infrastructure Partners application, that this is in or not, because if it does fail to make the cut, then this is money that we do not need to spend this year. And I think that's significant. So it's a bit of a dress rehearsal for me, but I'm very much in a trade-off frame of mind as we continue to have our debates on the budget. Thank you.
Steve, thank you. I'll get the Chief Executive to talk to this, but I think we're going to find that we have a timing mismatch. The phasing won't be quite right. Is that correct, Marty?
Well, I think the longer we take to start this, the less likely the chance of us actually being able to meet the shovel-ready criteria. It's one of those fine line things, but I guess the underlying point we're trying to make here is that this work is required, that this project is the highest priority project of any community development and or facility development across the city. In fact, I'd say across the Western Bay. It supports the Te Papa Peninsula intensification program, and there is an opportunity, I think, begging for Crown support as long as we do our bit at our end. And I think this, whilst a month or two may not necessarily break the bank or make the difference, it's a gesture by us that we are serious about this project, regardless of whether or not CIP funding is available or not.
Thank you, Marty, very much for that. Next speaker, next question is from Dawn. Thank you, Dawn.
Yeah, mine wasn't so much of a question. I'm enjoying hearing what everybody's saying because it's a really hard decision, this. I agree that we've always got to look towards the future. I completely agree with that, and putting plans in place for that is actually what I'm all about. However, just at this stage for myself, I'm just unsure about the next 4 weeks, what that's going to hold, level 3, level 4, businesses getting back up and down. I'd just like to see us, again, just focus on the bare basics just for the next month. That's kind of where I'm sitting at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, Dawn, thank you for that. I think we can safely assure that we'll be going to level 3 on Tuesday morning, Monday night, and then that, as I understand it, is going to be held for 2 weeks before we may drop down then to level 2. But notwithstanding that, and I do take your point, I think we do need to be future focused on some of these things. John, thank you.
Yeah, I would prefer to hold on this for a little bit. I understand we're going to now have basically weekly meetings effectively with council. We are light on information. My concern is twofold, that we haven't actually gone through and adopted this project in its entirety. It has a couple of components. One is a very strong community component, but the other is a commercial adjunct, which in theory will reduce the overall cost to the community. I haven't yet made a decision on that or been in a position with my colleagues to make a collective decision, obviously. So I don't think there's that big a hurry. And also just one last point, the $14,000 argument, i.e. it only impacts the rates the coming year by 14,000. The 350,000 is a bill that will be paid for by the community in some way, shape or form. And that goes to my point earlier about these capital projects do have implications down the line. So I think the $14,000 argument is disingenuous. It's a significant project that needs to be properly thought through and properly endorsed by us. And those two components, I think, need to be considered almost separately. If the community needs it, then the community needs it, and the community needs to fund it. And whether the visitor amenity thing is actually even viable post-COVID is a question we really need to get our heads around. So it's a complex question, and I'm not prepared to give a tacit endorsement to it now.
John, thank you. Councillors, I can't see, I beg your pardon. Heidi, you'd like to, is it a question or a comment?
Comment on the proposal. I love the idea of memorial park pools, teaching kids to swim, giving retirees a place to go and be healthy, and increasing in the intensification and helping with that whole vibe around Te Papa Peninsula. I'm really into this, but I also am concerned that if we don't get the government funding, and if what then does this look like? I'm really happy to wait. I think that waiting a month is probably prudent at this time, because we can spend that $350,000 anytime, but in this budget we might be having to wipe a whole lot of stuff out in the next very short term. I also think there's work to do around what is it that's going to drive intensification, and to do some. I know we haven't had much time in this suite of projects that we've sent up to shovel ready, but we're kind of doing a lot of guesswork right now, and I would like to see a lot more work around how can we encourage densification, and what does that look like, and what shovel ready projects are going to really enable that. I imagine this will be one of them. I'm really sure it will be, but what else and how is that conversation is yet to come, I think.
Thank you, Heidi. Jaco.
Last week when we spoke about this project, some of us thought that this should be a priority 2 project as opposed to priority 1 project. However, the majority decided to bump it up to a priority 1, saying that it is valuable and we need to get on and push this for central government. Now when it comes to paying for that, it sounds like we want to almost have our cake but not pay for it, so to speak. So I'd say if we're getting a grant from TEC, I believe it was, for half the cost of this to bring this forward, which would then likely make our, I suppose, our application, our funding application, be more favourable if we've bought into this project that we've asked for funding. Yeah, I just struggle to understand why the government would give us funding if we're not able to decide to put together 350 grand for it. Yeah, that just seems like we wouldn't be very committed. So I'll be voting in favour of this.
Thank you, Jaco. And in fact, that has been, you raise a very good point, which has been highlighted to us by the Crown on a number of occasions over various meetings during COVID by a number of cabinet ministers, saying that if, and I quote one, if we don't pony up, then we can't expect to be supported. So that's a very good point. Jaco, can I just suggest you might toggle your DIN plug in the side of your computer, because it might help. So with better comms, you're broken and a bit unreadable at the moment. Larry, you had a question.
Me, Timby, I point.
Sorry, who was it? Kelvin?
Kelvin, I was further up the list on the.
Beg your pardon. Sorry, the list is scrolling at a metaphoric pace.
That's fine.
Meteoric pace. So not metaphoric, meteoric.
No. So no, just very quickly speaking to it. You know, collectively we did, as elected members, decide to make this a priority one project. And I think I'd rather take a more sort of conservative approach and have the money in the budget, because we are going to be, looks like we're going to be having a further round of consultation anyway. And I'd like to hear further from the community. I think timing is quite critical on this. And I would like to think that, you know, we are showing a positive face to central government who are looking at all of these projects around the country, and I think it's important that we put our best foot forward. I particularly appreciate the TEC contribution, or likely contribution, which signifies community support, and I think that's a really important aspect and element of this as well. So I'll be voting for that recommendation. Thanks.
Thank you, Kelvin. Apologies for missing you. I can't see any other questions in the people holding their hands up. Are there any other questions?
I have a question. Yeah. I just wondered if I can ask the Chief Executive to comment, if we don't pass this today, what is likely to happen with the TEC funding? People are talking about spending 350, but this is a matter of saving 350 by getting a support from TEC. Can the Chief Executive make any comment about the potential of that funding coming from TEC if we don't go ahead?
Well, no, other than the fact that there's an element of a high element of goodwill there at the moment with that contribution, and you know, I guess if council doesn't make a decision at some stage in the reasonably near future on this, that goodwill may well be lost.
And follow up then, if as some suggested that we have another council meeting in 2 weeks' time, this would mean then a revocation of a decision today to change it around.
Well, not necessarily, not if the matter continues to lie on the table.
So I'll move that the matter lay on the table.
I'll second that.
Okay, just before we go to this, Bill, you've got a question.
Yeah, thanks, Tenby. Interesting in hearing the comments, and Jaco, I did the same, exactly the same as you, from priority from priority 2 to priority 1 for this project. Just one question though: if we don't support this 350k, would this influence the government's decision?
So is that a question of me, Councillor Granger?
If we don't support this 350k today, will this have any influence on the government's decision?
Yeah, Marty, I'm happy to answer, but you perhaps I think from your perspective will be good.
Well, I think you need to council need to ask themselves what signal they're sending central government and BVL. That's my comment on that.
Yeah, we should be putting this motion, I believe.
Okay, so the motion, as I understand it, was to leave it on the table, and that was moved by Kelvin. Was it moved by you? I'm sorry, I missed it.
No, it was Larry and John.
And John seconded it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. My apologies. I'm just struggling with the split screens here. Councillors, I will put that to you, that this motion does remain on the table. All those in favour?
Aye.
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 And it's an aye from me. Any opposed?
Yeah, I'm against.
Okay. So just one at a time. Kelvin's opposed. Who else is opposed?
I am. Jaco.
Jaco, thank you.
Sorry, I'm not entirely clear what leaving it on the table means. Sorry. What are we talking about leaving it on the table? Sorry.
Yeah, what we're doing, Heidi, is just leaving this for another day to make sure that we fit in with the timeframes if we can do, and we may not be able to, by the way, as opposed to voting on the contribution of $350,000 now being the forward capital expenditure of this project. We're trying to buy time, Heidi.
Thanks.
Sorry, we now, can I just, I'm going to have to do this by alphabetical order. I'm sorry, folks. So, Jaco.
Against.
Against. Larry.
In favour of it lying on the table.
Lying on the table. Kelvin.
Against.
Against. Thank you. Bill.
I'll support it lying on the table.
Support it lying on the table. Andrew.
In support.
In support of it lying on the table. Thank you. Heidi.
Against.
Dawn.
Lying on the table, thank you.
Steve.
Aye.
Thank you. John.
Aye.
Tina.
Aye.
And it's an aye from me. So the motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Is there any further discussion on this at all before we move on?
That completes it. We move on.
Thank you very much. Just making sure.
That completes the Chief Executive report, Your Worship.
It does indeed. Thank you very much, Marty. Much appreciated.
Well done. Thank you.
Just bear with me one moment. All right, we're moving, councillors. We're moving to 10 points, which is the amendment to the emergency committee and the law change. Ask legal counsel Nick Swallow to address this for us. Thank you, Nick.
Good afternoon, Your Worship. I think this report is best classed as a very technical report. I can summarise it by saying that structure shortly before.
Nick, I'm sorry, I'm not sure if it's just me, but we're struggling to hear you. I don't know if you...
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder, Nick, it might, I can't actually see you, I'm sorry. I don't know if you've got your headset in, but it might pay to take your headset out if you could do. And just speak directly to the computer, your laptop, if that's what you're on.
Can you hear me?
No, still broken and unreadable, sorry.
Any luck now?
That seems to be a bit better, Nick. Thank you.
Apologies for that. What I was saying is this is a highly technical report, but central government has passed a law that means we no longer have to have physical quorums. So this report is a very minor modification to the resolution passed shortly before we went into lockdown, just to make council meetings workable. So unless there are any questions, I'll read.
All right, thank you, Nick. Councillors, are there any questions of Nick?
I'm happy to move it.
Thank you, Kelvin. And can I get a second? Can I get a seconder?
Happy to second. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I missed who that was. Sorry.
I defer to Jaco.
Happy to second.
Jaco, you're seconding. Thank you very much. And was it Steve? Was it you that is moving this?
I moved that, Mayor Temby. Kelvin.
Oh, Kelvin, thank you. Sorry.
Just in speaking to it, if clearly the steps that we've taken to form this emergency committee being slightly sort of trumped, as it were, by central government legislation, And I think this just brings us into line with that. So nothing much really to debate on this, I believe. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kelvin. Jaco, any comments?
No, I agree with Kelvin. It makes good sense to adopt what central government has allowed us to do.
Very good. Thank you very much, Jaco. Councillors, any questions of Nick or any comments?
No.
Thank you. I'll put to you that, bear with me just 2 seconds, that we adopt recommendations A, 1 and 2.
Correct.
All
Aye.
those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Anyone against? Any abstentions? Thank you, councillors. That is carried. Which moves us on to 10.3. The draft 2021 annual plan and the COVID-19 update. I'll leave it to the staff members. Christine, are you leading this?
I'm happy to do this, and Paul will probably hop in as well. So maybe if I sort of give a bit of an overview, and then Paul might wish to speak to some of the financial elements.
Thank you, Christine. I'll leave it over to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so as we spoke before, the council has already adopted a draft annual plan for consultation. It was adopted just as the COVID lockdown was occurring. And so there was some notice within the actual document about COVID, but we really didn't have any understanding of what the implications would be. Now that is becoming clearer, and some initial financial modelling has been undertaking, and I'll let Paul speak to that. So what we are thinking is we need to relook at elements of the annual plan, and it is likely that we will need to reconsult with the community about that. So what we're seeking here is some direction from the elected members about some of the key principles that would need to be applied or taken into account in that decision-making process, because it will guide staff in terms of bringing back issues and options for consideration about levels of investments, changes in level of service that could be considered in the annual plan. So in Resolution C, you'll see there those key elements of factors that we're suggesting you'd like to give us some direction on about whether they are more or less focus compared to what is currently in the draft annual plan, and then we will do some further work and come back with a series of discussions for the elected members and a series of choices to be made. Or perhaps just hand to Paul to cover the financial elements.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. Yeah, just in terms of the financials, as you're aware, the financial situation was quite tight, particularly from a debt perspective prior to COVID, and elected members elected to reduce the rate increase down from the initial 12.6 to 7.6, which is with public consultation. That did allow us to continue with a lot of our capital program, or the bulk of our capital program. Subsequent financial modelling has forecast a number of scenarios, but they all lead to a significant reduction in our operational revenue, particularly user fees, and including within that is the implications of bay venues. Those implications are modelled to work through a considerable part of next year, particularly if we remain in a level 2 or greater lockdown scenario. The implications of that obviously are quite significant on what we can deliver from a capital perspective. So this paper is looking at bringing those principles to ask elected members the areas of more or less or the same focus as the draft annual plan, so that staff can then bring back the best possible annual plan through the May and June period for further discussion. I think I recognised before that we may be in the situation of needing to reconsult, because our plan may be significantly different to our annual plan, and for that matter, our long-term plan. So that's something that, as Christine alluded to earlier, that staff are working in terms of what would a 31 July timeframe look like as opposed to a 30 June timeframe. But it would potentially mean, I suspect, as a minimum, that a need to reconsult within that time period. So, take any questions.
Thank you, Paul and Christine. Councillors, any questions of either Paul or Christine?
I've got a question, Mayor Temby.
Thank you, Kelvin.
So, Paul and Christine, are you looking for us as elected members to, like, for example, if we said all of those principles we wanted to remain the same, that doesn't give you anything to go on, is that right? You're looking for us to look at some principles perhaps to increase and others to decrease, or you're looking for some more on the decreasing side to help with the budget? Is that the sort of thing you're looking for from us at this point?
So maybe I can start with the answer to that. Like it can be exactly the same as what is sitting within the annual plan. That is fine. It's really saying, like, you know, for example, if you want us to take a greater focus on social elements, then we would make sure that we're really concentrating in terms of looking at the levels of service around the social elements that may occur within there. What I should have also said as well is that some services we may be delivering in a different format as well, so that may change our cost structure as well. But this is really to give some indication if there are particular areas, and I think Councillor Hughes alluded to some of them in the previous paper, for example, that, you know, around the four well-beings, to put a heavier focus on those areas than we would otherwise have planned for the annual plan.
Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Paul. Thanks for your question, Kelvin. We've got Larry, then Steve. Larry, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Temby. Paul, given that we are now beginning to have this conversation about reconsulting, the recommendations in front of us, which say more focus than the draft, less focus, status quo, I'm wondering if you are going to get enough of an indication from us if we took the position today that it wasn't more focus or less focus than the draft AP, but simply a prioritisation of our focus, because I can see it's going to be very difficult to work through all of those today, given the problems we have with doing this not in one room altogether, but just because there's going to be potentially a new annual plan consultation going out. We just want to give you guidance on our priorities. Is that fair enough? And will that work for you?
Yes, it will. I guess we just want to make sure we don't go and produce something that's inconsistent with elected members' direction in terms of what your priorities are. So yes, that would work.
And therefore, I might just suggest, Mayor Temby, that maybe, you know, the only way we're going to get through this, given we've had lots of talk about it since we've had the report to us, that we may have to just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and go, you know, all in favour of the same, more, or, you know, status quo, less, to try and see how we're going to give this indication. It's going to be complicated.
Larry, I appreciate that entirely. What I was going to do is break it down in any way that you wanted, but I was particularly going to break C down into 8 parts anyway. I think we have no choice but to do that. But at the moment, we'll get to that in a second. Steve, I understand you have a question, and followed by John.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Temby. Christine, to you. In terms of Council's planning functions, one of the options there is to have less focus on Council's future planning functions and infrastructure. And whenever anybody sort of raises that as something that could be for consideration, reference is made back to the GFC and the halting of planning essentially around that time. So I'm just wondering if you could outline what occurred within Council's planning function within the GFC, My understanding is that there was something that the interim chief executive did, which was quite well extreme, I can put it that way, and how we sit now within our planning function, so I can get kind of a feel of where we're sitting.
So yeah, happy to respond. So through the GFC, there were sort of two key decisions that were made by council at the time. One was to significantly pull back on the capital infrastructure investment, and the reason of that was because growth wasn't occurring. And the second one was to pull back on planning, both in terms of infrastructure planning, so planning and design of infrastructure, and land use planning, so rolling out of the land use plan in terms of residential intensification and brownfields. Because of the pullback, and it was quite dramatic pullback of resourcing into the planning area, when the growth picked up again, we didn't have land ready to go in terms of zoning, and we also didn't have infrastructure projects that we had plans in the drawer that we could take to market, and that's really led is still what we're suffering to some extent. It's not the whole reason, but it is one of the reasons we're still suffering today from not enough land supply in market, and we're still running in terms of preparing projects to be able to be delivered in terms of infrastructure. So where we're at currently now, the council over the last couple of years has made a decision to significantly invest in the planning areas in both the infrastructure and the land use. And if you're asking for my professional recommendation, it would be to look at the just-in-time delivery for infrastructure, and also to retain your investment in the planning so that you are ready to go. We do know in Tauranga that generally when there's been a depression or an economic downturn, Tauranga is one of the first to pick up, and it picks up more sharply than other places around New Zealand. And now this is a different type of economic slowdown, but we would still expect a similar sort of response. So being ready to be able to respond and have the plans in the drawer to go would be our recommendation.
Thank you, Christine. In terms of the supplementary, Your Worship, just my understanding of those extreme actions that were taken that time, the council's entire planning function almost disappeared. Would that be fair to say? I mean, that sounds quite extreme to me, but that's my understanding of the time period. Council's planning function was essentially done away with, essentially the land use planning function. Is that correct?
Partially. There was a proposal at the time by the interim chief executive that basically saw that land use planning function disappear. There was significant pushback by the developers of the day, and it was partially reinstated, but there were still some losses. So it wasn't, what ended up being left was still a level of resourcing, but not a full resourcing complement.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I think, John, you have a question.
Yes, it needs a little bit of preface, but I suppose I'm concerned that the report, if we respond to it as it's written, won't give sufficient direction. And what I'd like to do is, just by way of example, talk about the possible things that some might feel should be in scope. So if I picked, for instance, and I suppose I'm looking to Marty really for a response on this. Marty, if someone said, or the decision by elected members or a recommendation by a majority of elected members was to look at cutting staff salaries by 20% and moving the entire organisation to a 4-day week, would that be in or out of scope of something that, so I noticed in a later supplementary document that came on the agenda, we had right sizing down there. And I suppose what I'm looking at here is that there are other constraints. I noticed that Auckland Council, for instance, are looking at different rates level scenarios as part of their work on their second consultation. Yet we don't mention that specifically here. It's just that principles are not mentioned in this context in the Local Government Act. It's about outcomes and prioritisation. And I'm concerned that it's a bit of a blunt tool. And I suppose I'm looking for, is this going to be enough for you to come back to us with the level of detail we're going to need to look at? You know, do we need to spend $3 million on events as we're currently budgeting? can I just get some more on that, please?
Yeah, look, my view, we should be approaching this from a perspective of what is essential and what isn't essential given the changed circumstances and environment that we now are operating in. And then if we extrapolated that out over the next 3, 6, 9 or 12 months and understood what our restraints or constraints were within the various operating levels, it would lead us to some decisions about what it is we are going to do over that period and what it is that we don't need to do over that period, and what it is we're going to do more of. And so my proposal in relation to this is actually that Council give us guidance, and it's not necessarily a decision. And on that guidance, we then go do an exercise of what that looks like out over the next 3, 6, 9 or 12 months. And yeah, basically it boils down to what is it that we have to do? What is it that we don't have to do? What is it that we don't need to do? And look, to be honest, I think we were just seeking guidance from Council as opposed to a firm decision at this point because things are so fluid.
I appreciate that. I suppose that's where I'm a bit nervous about the, if I can use the word, the crudeness of that sort of 3-level approach to those very, very broad areas, some of which need to be deconstructed. You know, if we look at, for instance, the economic development area, so a supplementary question, but how do we separate, for instance, maybe how we feel about priority 1 and take into account what's going to happen with international tourism? We may not want to treat the components of ED the same way, and this doesn't give you the ability to nuance that or understand the collective position within those broad, as I say, areas that staff for some reason are describing as principal.
Councillor Robson, through the chair, if we could just make a comment that the intention behind this of just giving that guidance would be we would need to bring those options back to you. So you would certainly get to see those options around, for example, what investment went into economic development or tourism or whatever that might be as part of that exercise. So this is just the first high-level guidance. We bring back the proposal in terms of what that would look like in terms of a reflecting a change to the current annual plan if needed.
And perhaps if I could say that the feedback that we have had so far probably sends us in 11 different directions.
Yeah, and I was just about to say, I think we do need to keep this strategic, but Christine, you make a point, I think. Paragraph 54 identifies the activities that may need reconsideration. Do you just want to talk to that briefly?
I think what we've tried to do is identify those areas where the impacts of COVID are more significant and where Council might wish to reconsider the level of investment, either more, less or the same, as opposed to potentially some other areas like, for example, water, which I think everybody would agree we pretty much need to get on and deliver. There will be opportunities at the fringes, but probably not wholesale across that activity. So we've identified that we think these types of activities here are the ones where we would have to do most of the work to bring back issues and options for you for consideration. It would be useful to get an indication as to, and some of these are the matters that have been raised by Councillor Robson. Are there other areas where you would have thought we should be looking? And are there some areas where you would think you wouldn't want us to be focusing a lot of time in terms of bringing back issues and options papers? So in some ways, it's just a slightly different way of looking at the resolutions that are currently recommended for you.
Great, thank you, Christine. Larry, you had a question.
Yeah, Marty, if I may, to you, given that we're talking about potentially reconsulting and the time frame for that, if we were going to look at following what Auckland have done and adopting end of July instead of the end of June, isn't it conceivable that we would be going to consult possibly in June or late May through June and then having July to deliberate and make a decision? the longer we wait, my reason for that is the longer we wait, the more time we have before we go out to reconsult, the more we will know about what's really going on, what levels we're at, what the future looks like. So would another 2 weeks in terms of this record, what you're seeking from us, because like you just said, at the moment, it looks like we're going in 7 or 8 different directions, and that's not helpful for you because every direction we want to send you in involves a lot of work for the staff, a lot of different scenarios, a lot of analysis. So do we need to do this today, given that we are likely to be looking at reconsulting?
No, the answer is no, and I don't think, whilst it would be nice if collectively there could be an agreement as to the prioritisation of that, I don't imagine we could spend the next 6 months trying to achieve that. And in my view, if we build up a budget that takes into account no external support or relief for our debt situation, I think it may only leave us with essential services anyway. So I think we need to do that exercise to understand actually what headroom, if any, we have to do anything over above our essential services. And then it might be a matter of coming back and having a conversation with council about if we have some additional capacity, where do we believe it should go?
So, Council, given that, would you like to leave this on the table and bring it up at a different point, at a point when this information is more refined? Larry, that's, I think, what you're suggesting. Is that correct?
Well, I almost think we've got no option but to just leave this bit, the C, on at least for 2 weeks. I personally believe, Mayor Temby, we have an executive team. I don't know what happened there. Executive team that we have to rely on to give us some guidance. They're seeking guidance from us, but actually I think we need to err on the side of allowing them to give us guidance, give us recommendations, and narrow down how much we're having to choose, because there are so many unknowns. We're likely to just end up with hours and hours of discussion and not giving them what they really need to get on with the job.
All right, Larry. Well, then, are you happy to move a motion around the fact that staff will do more work on this, we'll prioritise this in a slightly different way, see if we can get agreement, and come back to this as soon as we can?
Yeah, the purpose of my question was to see if that was okay with the Chief Executive, not going to cause major problems in the organisation. I'd then move A, B, D and E, and basically the other be left on the table. Or just ignore it, basically A, B, D, and E, and you come back to us.
All right. Can I get so Larry, if that's understood by everyone, and I'm assuming that it is, I can't see.
E becomes redundant.
E becomes redundant. Yeah, exactly right, Steve. Yep. So can I get a second?
A, B, and D.
Yeah. Just bear with me 2 seconds. It does become A, B, and D in that case. If council is happy with that, and Larry, you've moved it, can I get a seconder for that new option?
I'll second it.
Sorry, who was that? Andrew.
Andrew. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Andrew.
I'll just speak to it briefly, Temby,
yes,
but it doesn't mean that this has been a waste of time. It has engaged our minds and our discussion about the need eventually to do some prioritising. We're going to have to make these decisions, but I guess in the process that we're going through and the things that change every day, now knowing we're going to level 3 next week and so on, it wouldn't hurt, I don't think, to leave C out and just go with A, B, and D.
All right, thank you, Larry. Andrew?
Yeah, I think the provisions or the principles as written were a little, let's say they could have been a bit more granular. I'd also like to see a little bit more, a lot more numbers around things. What's involved in OPEX and CAPEX, for example, before I could even decide whether the the principles matched up with what I thought was a good idea. I also appreciate that it's a fairly big body of work. The matrix involved might be fairly large, so I think that this is a way to get past that and get moving. We're also meeting every week at the moment, so our advice and guidance and direction is available fairly frequently.
Thank you, Andrew. We've got questions and comments. Firstly, John, followed by Heidi, followed by Kelvin. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a question, I suppose, to Marty. I'm a little bit concerned that the motion as it currently sits doesn't give you any real direction at all in terms of focus, or even, and I suppose I'm heading more towards a process level. And again, by example, the current draft AP, the supporting financial information, has quite a bit at what we call an activity level. And the community who's listening to this probably need to go online and look at the document to understand what I'm talking about. But each different activity area of council has a reasonably detailed budget. And I would like to suggest that from a process perspective, using that framework would be helpful in terms of getting a feel by the staff of the councillors' focus areas. I think that would be a good starting point. My concern at the moment is that we're not giving you either direction nor an indication of the nature of the process we're comfortable with. So it's a pretty, and I appreciate Larry's point. I agree with the issue. We can't work with where we are. We're not going to give you what you need, but I'm concerned we're not addressing how we might get to what you need. If you could give me some response to that, as to Marty.
Yeah, look, the executive had a conversation about this yesterday morning, given the varied feedback that we'd received through the mayor and councillors. So I do believe this is a matter of, within our financial constraints and the loss of revenue that we are looking at through the next financial year, it's a matter of simply understanding the essential services that we are going to deliver, understanding what those services are that we're required or mandated to deliver, and then understanding what, if anything, is left. And then it'll be a matter of, in my view, going through activity by activity and understanding whether or not that service or the current levels of service are something that we can afford to continue with. That's what I'm suggesting, is that we actually build a balanced budget as the starting point, and then any investment we get from the Crown will then allow further funds to be injected, and service levels or wider services to be delivered. So I think we can come back to you through the Finance Audit and Risk Committee with a bit of a framework on how we will go about building that up and how we join council to the feedback and decision-making process.
I think sorry, just responding to that was supplementary, if I may. You know that starting with the essentials and building a balanced budget is close to my heart. My supplementary question is, would a public workshop on those activities where councillors get to discuss them or be briefed on each activity be of value in the process, so the public can see the thinking of councillors around those activities? To address the whole swathe of what we are inside a FARC meeting would be quite difficult, whereas a public workshop where we are briefed and just discuss those items, no decisions, may be of value to staff and our community. Would that be of value, or no time?
Well, I think only once we have a straw man for council to consider.
I'm sure you could provide that.
Yeah, so whether it's a workshop or whether it's a meeting, I actually think there needs to be a straw man or a draft on the table for council to consider. That would I think work.
Thank you.
I think we took an optimistic approach that if we provided and got guidance early from council on this, that when we went away and did a whole lot of work and presented it back, we wouldn't be in a position where council said that's not what we asked for. So I think there's another framework that we can deliver and process we can deliver that hopefully will keep both the executive and the organisation aligned with the council thinking in a way that has transparency and is open to the public.
Great, thank you, Marty. We've got a number of questions here. Look, folks, just though I think we all need to accept we're in unknown territory here. We don't know what we're going to get from government, to be honest. And while we've put up a good case for a range of options, a Bay of Plenty or Western Bay of Plenty plan, we simply don't know what money will be available to us. And I think planning for the essentials is going to be critically important. There is no doubt about that. But I do think we need to just understand that we won't have all the information at our disposal in a timely manner that we would might otherwise have to make decisions. But decisions will have to be made anyway. As I've got the list here, Kelvin followed by Steve.
Hey, thanks very much. Oh, I think Heidi was before me. Heidi was before me, I think, Timby.
Thanks.
Pardon, sorry, Heidi, you go ahead, followed by Kelvin, followed by Steve.
I'm just aware that we haven't had many public council meetings as yet, and the agenda, there's been a lot of interest in this agenda based on those principles, and I'm just wondering whether it would be worth us going around the table to see where people's heads are at now, so the public's actually kind of brought along on this journey, and knowing that our views may change, knowing that our direction may change, but we are on a process which until now with what we've put in a paper, you know, in a discussion paper to the chief executive, we've done that without the community, so it'd be really quite a good, I would have thought, to bring to have an opportunity for them to understand how our heads are at the moment.
Heidi, we can do that, but we're going to be here a long time if we go around in a circle. If I do a roll call and do that, we could be here for another 2 hours. So I'm happy that we do that in an organised way. I don't believe we've got time to do that right now out of the blue, and I'd suggest that perhaps we could do it in response to the straw man that Marty and Tim are going to put up, and that we'll be organised to do it, and we can make time for it. If I am correct, we are now moving to Kelvin.
Yeah, thanks very much. Look, thank you, Heidi. I appreciate the intent behind your request, but I do agree that's something that we should do in response to Marty's straw person. And I agree with John. I mean, the staff, I think, in putting recommendation C together, I understand why they were trying to do that to elected members to allow us to give them more direction. But I think the process of going down to activity by activity level is probably the right sort of level of granulation. So I'm very happy to support John's view on that. And I think it means then that staff can also practically see what we are wanting to change activity by activity rather than broad principles. So I'm very happy with this approach, and thank you, Marty, for suggesting a new framework. So I look forward to seeing that in due course. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelvin. Steve.
Thank you, Mayor. Marty, the course of action that you're proposing, the working up what the essential services are, and then seeing if there's anything that we can do in terms of discretionary services, does the resolution on the table provide you with sufficient clarity and mandate to go ahead and do that, or does it require clarification or a bit tighter wording for posterity to enable you to do that safely?
Well, Resolution D certainly does the fact that we need to conduct further work using different scenarios, and I think we've really only alluded to the scenario where we don't get any external support or debt relief, but I think we actually need to draw that up and understand what it means in terms of our service delivery and capital program, and the impact that it will have on that. So yeah, it's a piece of work that we need to do regardless of this resolution, but I'm satisfied that D allows us to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Tina, I wasn't sure. Did you have a question? No question.
No, I would no, I didn't have a question. I was just actually agreeing that I think that it would be great to hear from Marty, because I think at this point we just don't have enough information to know what we're dealing with.
All right, Tina, thank you very much. Councillors, any more questions? Okay, so in that case, Larry, would you just like to reframe your motion, please, so we all have a clear understanding of what it is from you?
Yeah, and I'll just add a little writer reply to it as well to conclude the debate. So I move that Council A recognises the impacts of COVID-19. I'll read it for those who may be watching on the screen. The impacts of COVID-19 pandemic on the nation, the city and the council will require significant reconsideration of the draft 2020-21 annual plan prior to adoption by 30 June 2020. As I read that, perhaps we could have even amended and inserted or later, given that that is potentially a possibility. And I think I will suggest that that is amended now because you know, we seem to be heading down that track. So with the seconder's permission, I would have just by 30 June 2020 or later, we begin to signal to the community that, and in fact, we may be reconsulting.
Yeah, good idea, Larry.
Recognises that the direct impact on council government stimulus package opportunities is currently unknown, and that depending on the outcome of those opportunities, further analysis and options beyond those covered by this report may need to be considered by council prior to the adoption of the 2020-21 annual plan. And then D, notes that the staff will conduct further work on planning scenarios relating to further future disruption assumptions to be brought to a subsequent council or committee meeting for endorsement. And as a brief right of reply, I think, you know, within that D, there might be possibly 3 scenarios that we begin to address: a possibility of a reasonable response to our CIP application that enables some of the needed infrastructure work to go forward. You know, nothing coming, and then rates levels, of course, will also be part of that, because we're not here agreeing to a 0 rate or any particular percentage of rate. Rating will be a way in which we bring in more income if we need to. If we're at a flat base and we're just doing basic things and we feel we have to do more than that, then that's where rating will be coming into it. And finally, just briefly, that, you know, I would push back against the idea of having a workshop so that the public may get some idea of our thinking. I've sat through quite a few workshops and had conversations with the public as they left, and they were none the wiser of our thinking in those sort of scenarios. We do need to have help in this crisis. We all know this is the biggest crisis the world's seen for 100 years, and here we are sitting having to make some very, very important decisions. I think we need to rely upon some people in our team who are very experienced. Even they may be new to it, but they are working very well so far, our executive team, and I believe we need to lean more heavily on them. Yes, we want facts, but we also need some good advice, and I think this is what we'll have in a week's time, and then another week, and then another week. We'll be working this through until we finally complete this annual plan process.
All right, Larry, thank you very much. Before I ask Andrew to talk to this, he may wish to. I see, John, you have an amendment, a suggested amendment.
Yeah, if I may, and I don't know whether the mover and seconder would just take it on. Would like the clarity, Larry, on A, of actually put 31 July 2020 in there. And the reason I would like to do that is because I think giving an artificial deadline and then sort of moving it lacks clarity. My concern at the moment is staff are working under enormous pressure. The annual plan consultation documents had errors. They went out without a second set of eyes on them. There was more than one error in our consultation documents. I just think the 31st of July would take some pressure off, and there's already a precedent, obviously, with Auckland's statement to the NZX. So if you'd accept that, I'd be happy then to shut up for the rest of this motion and just vote for it.
Yeah, just acknowledging that in the process we have completed debate, and that was the right of reply. But if I can just ask the chief executive, because this becomes the question then, are we making the decision today that we are going to reconsult and we are going to set the plan at July 31? If that is the decision we are making, and if the chief executive is asking us to make that decision, then I'm comfortable to put that date in.
No, I actually think we need to take further advice on this. And the reality is we've got a Finance, Audit and Risk Committee next week. We also have an extraordinary council meeting next week. So I don't think we need to, and I don't think we should make that decision today. I think we still need to understand what the time frame looks like and work back from 31 July and also take some legal advice and speak to the Audit Office about that as well. And we can report back on that at the Audit and Risk Committee next week.
Yeah, I'll accept that.
Excellent. Thank you, Marty. That's the advice we need. Thank you. So the resolutions stand, and I'll ask the chairman now, Mayor Temby, to put it to the vote.
Right, just very quickly, Andrew, did you have anything else to add to that?
No, I'm fine, thanks.
Okay, great, thank you. Members, I'll put to you then the resolution as Larry read out. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
All those against? Any abstentions? Carried. Thank you, members. Can I suggest we break now for, say, 10 minutes?
Yes, please.
For those that need to, and if we could reconvene has been involved following legal advice. So the serial beginning, the direct transactional services manager, has been deleted down to rates remission policy. So those 5 or 6 lines, whatever's there. I will ask Ross, I'm not sure whether you or Christine are going to speak to this.
It's probably me, and again, Paul might wish to make some comments, and Ross may wish to speak some of the detail.
Great, thank you.
So this has really come about from trying to think about what would be some of the implications in terms of local businesses, community organisations and ratepayers in terms of transactions and interactions that they have with council that are impacted by COVID, and what are the opportunities for council to respond to that. I think the important part is in section 6, and particularly given the conversation that we've just had for the last item, council is under significant financial restraint. So we've applied these principles about short-term and doesn't significantly impact on level of service, because council still needs to make those decisions about level of service that don't significantly impact council's revenue, given our revenue constraint and what that means for our business, and that needs to be a conscious council call about the impacts of that. Must be flexible and equitable, and where it's feasible, needs-based, be generally consistent with our financial strategy, and where possible, be consistent with broad approaches being put in place by other councils. So the report works through a range of issues in terms of community support, business support and ratepayer support. And there's also attachment which addresses a number of matters that have been raised by the Chamber and other parties seeking for council to give recognition. Some of those are underway as a matter of course, some of them are outside of our scope and relate to other entities. So that's really there to record all of those issues, and we're happy to respond to any specific questions the elected members may have. And in the resolutions, the recommended way forward, except as was noted at the beginning of the meeting, item 2, which relates to water rate penalties, is not possible from a legal perspective. So the staff are withdrawing recommendation B. I'll leave it there and perhaps hand to Paul if he wants to cover anything specific, and then we're happy to take questions.
Lovely, thank you, Christine. Paul, if we could perhaps hear from you first, and then questions to both of you from the elected members. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, as Christine said, it's a little bit, it is a balancing situation with this. Obviously, every dollar of revenue that we give up makes our financial situation difficult. However, what we've come up with here is a package of works that you know, allows an amount of relief to be given to those that need it, and in a way that doesn't dramatically impact on those ratios. Just very briefly, so you're aware of what happened with B, the legal advice was around that was largely to do with a policy change or an impact on your policy that impacts rating because of the significance of that, and the fact that it impacts on your ability to collect revenue would need to be consulted on, and also some concern around distinguishing between hardship in a COVID and a non-COVID environment, and to note that we do actually already have a delegation for finance staff to be able to remit in the event of hardship. So we still have those case by case ability to actually deal with that one. So any questions?
Thanks, Paul and Christine. Councillors, any questions of either Paul or Christine?
Yes, if I may, Mayor Temby.
Thanks, Larry.
In recommendation E, it reads provides for commercial and residential license to occupy, lease and grazing agreements a 50% rent relief. Just wanting to clarify about the LTO relief for the businesses that have been closed since lockdown, and particularly the hospitality businesses that will remain closed probably through level 3. So are we talking there about 50% relief of the LTO, and if so, why 50%, not 100%, given that they are not using it at all?
Yes, so through the chair, the reason for the 50% is largely because, or a couple of reasons. Is one is inquiries that we've had a lot across a number of other areas within the city. 50% is a number that is used, and the reason we're using that number is there still are costs incurred, whether it be maintenance, whether it be electricity or whatever for those particular sites, and not to allow a full 100%, acknowledging that may not be fully applicable to LTOs because of the nature of them, that there would be, an argument that number could be higher, given that it's not like a building where, in fact, those costs do continue. So there is an argument to increase that amount. There's not a lot of science behind the 50%, except consistent with what other landlords are providing.
Okay, so supplementary, if I can, Paul, in light of what you've just said, do we need to amend that 50%, or will you be able to adjust it upwards if it's necessary in regard to the LTOs? And just finally, a little question: if they have a support package from the government, was that support package actually helping to cover such things as the LTO? In which case, we may not, want to be doing 100%. I'll just clarify that.
Well, support package largely is around covering off from a wage subsidy perspective, and not the LTO amount. So I would recommend that we would need to adjust that resolution to reflect up to 100% for LTOs.
And that would certainly have my support, Paul. I take Larry's point that if it's not being used, then it begs the question as to what the rent is about at all. Thank you, Larry. John, you had a question, followed by Kelvin.
Yes, I did. It's again, it relates to E, and it talks about 50% rent relief for people, commercial, who perhaps lease land effectively, and it uses the government's COVID-19 support package criteria. And I'm just wondering which particular commercial support package we're talking about, because by one set of financial support criteria, that includes organizations with a turnover up to $80 million, which is way out of my view of sort of the SME type focus we should have here. So I'm just looking for clarification on that. And I suppose at the risk of upsetting a wonderful contributor to our GDP, there is a large organization which has a building on some land not far from the airport. And I wonder whether we're really seriously talking about giving them, via our CCO or via someone else, a 50% discount in their lease. Can I get some clarity on that?
Councillor Robson, what I'll do is I'll just get someone just to work up the detail on that while we continue, and get that information to you in a minute.
Thank you.
John, while we're waiting for this and before Kelvin, I will say that there is no definition around revenue for an SME. It's 20 staff or less. There are many companies, as you know, that have high turnover but very low margin, particularly those that provide food and the like to supermarkets. So I think we just need to be a bit cautious about putting a revenue-based figure on this.
Yeah, look, I agree with that. Actually, there's a lot of debate around definitions of SMEs. MFAT has one definition, MB has a different definition. It's very, you've got lots of experience in this area. But my concern, I suppose, is we need to make sure that we don't use a definition that, from our community's perspective, 10B is supporting an organisation that may well be able to support itself, while some other of our organisations really are the medium enterprise sector are really struggling. So I appreciate the turnover thing, but there's a large company I'm thinking of, and I'm trying to avoid using their name. But
well, I don't think there's any need to do that, and don't disagree at all. We've got SMEs that are going to be in great pain out there, tourism and hospitality and what have you, particularly. But or IRD, or anyone that has a revenue base for an SME descriptor or criteria. Kelvin, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This was further to John's point, and it relates specifically to paragraph H, which talks about airport leases and commercial tenants. So along the same lines as John, I'd like to think that can be nuanced somewhat so that we are targeting SMEs rather than all commercial tenants. So I'd be looking for a little bit of guidance on how to alter the wording of H along those lines. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Your Worship, perhaps if I could make some comments here.
Thank you, Marty.
So in commercial leases following the Christchurch earthquake, the Auckland District Law Society introduced a new clause, Clause 27, that talked about situations where tenants were prevented for one reason or another from entering their properties. And this is a situation where Clause 27 really has been sort of used and exercised for the first time. It talks about landlords and tenants coming to a fair conclusion around ongoing rent or not. And it just seems that many landlord-tenant relationships have opted for the 50-50 split. I think in terms of a truly commercial enterprise, that might be a good starting point to have a conversation. But ultimately, I think it does depend on the type of activity and whether or not they're an essential service, whether they can continue with the whole or part of their business, and it needs to be done on a case-by-case basis. So I think using the 50% as a, if you like, a starting point, and then taking other factors into consideration. So I actually think this is going to be an exercise where we must speak and understand the circumstances of every agency or commercial entity that we have a lease with, and follow those guidelines, trying to seek a fair resolution in each.
Thank you, Marty. So just supplementary to that, and thanks for that explanation. Presumably not every commercial lease we have includes that clause 27, because I assume they've been developed over many years. So I like the idea of the case-by-case basis. So if we can somehow incorporate that into those resolutions, H and I guess E as well, I think that would be the way to go, rather than a blanket.
Yeah, look, I think if we, the principles of Clause 27, I think, talk about fairness, and whilst they might not necessarily be in some of our older lease agreements, I think the principle of acting fairly in this situation is probably appropriate. I don't think we need to make a decision on this particular clause today. Really, it's about seeking feedback so that we can come back, whether through a FARC committee or through the next council meeting, to firm up on this.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Marty, thank you. Appreciate the response. Thank you, Kelvin. Any other questions, councillors?
Question, Mayor Tenby. Steve here.
Thank you, Steve.
In that regard, could we then leave H out and deal with it in subsequent meetings? Because I think there's an appetite to do look at the case-by-case thing, obviously delegated to staff, but could we do that perhaps when someone moves it?
Would you like to move that, Steve? I was about to do that. I wasn't aware there was more questions.
Sure.
So you wanted to add that as a motion.
I'm happy to move A to G, with E reading up to 100%
in respect of LTOs.
In respect of LTOs only, yeah.
All right, Steve is moving a motion, councillors. B is deleted, so we're going A to G, omitting H, and you are refining clause E to 100% in respect of LTOs. Can I have a seconder for that? Sorry, who was that?
Happy to second.
John, thank you very much. Steve, do you want to talk to this at all?
Yeah, very, very briefly, Mayor Tenby. It's an appropriate response. I mean, the previous agenda item will let the community know the magnitude of the constraints we're working with, and so this does respond to the Chamber of Commerce request for us to work with our community where we can, and the expectation of our community that we do so as well. It's fit for purpose for Tauranga. I support 100%, up to 100% of LTOs, and of course the lease and grazing agreements at 50% rent relief, and we can just leave H for now and consider that on a case-by-case basis, or staff will consider that on a case-by-case basis once they have further direction from us. Thank you.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, I will speak to it now. Thank you, Tenby. It's effectively, H is now effectively included in E, as I understand it, because we've no longer carved it out specifically. So we just need to understand the implications of that.
Yeah, I think that's right, because we are including in H, sorry, in E, other than license to operate.
Yeah.
There are
commercial leases.
Commercial leases, and I'm not sure that there's much grazing going on at the airport, but they certainly are covered in leases. All right, very good. John, did you want to add to that before I put the motion to council?
No, I think the spirit is clear. I just think, staff just need to exercise judgment here and make sure that we don't get a headline about giving an enormous discount to a large multinational organisation with its headquarters, I don't know, in Saudi Arabia or Australia or any other country other than New Zealand.
Yeah, I expect it's Australia. But anyway, moving on from that, thank you very much, Council. If I could put to you the motion as Steve has reframed it, which is A to G, excluding B for obvious reasons, and the amendment to E. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Yes. Any abstentions? Carried, Council. Thank you very much for that. We're moving on now to 10.5, which is local government funding agency amendments. Mohan, I'm pretty sure you are with it. Can I pass over with us? I beg your pardon. I'll pass over to you now. Thank you.
Good afternoon, councillors. This LGFA amendments is basically to allow council-controlled organisations to borrow directly from LGFA rather than go through their parent council, and also facilitate longer term that if there were any CCOs set up which are owned by multiple councils. That's the purpose of it. This was originally approved back in 2018 AGM, and then reconfirmed in 19, and it was planned that before COVID that these amendments will be signed off by agreements we signed up by 30th of April, but then COVID's come along and that sort of delayed a few things. So the plan is from 1 July, they can put the agreements in place with the CCOs. And these have been reviewed by Simpson Grayson on behalf of the Shareholders Council, and Russell McBride done the work for LGFA. Happy to answer any questions.
Very good, Mohan. Thank you very much. Councillors, any questions of Mohan?
Yes, I have one.
Yes,
Steve, Larry.
Sorry, just bear with me 2 seconds, 3:15. So, I beg your pardon, John, can Steve followed by Larry, followed by Kelvin, and then John, if you wouldn't mind. So I missed the complete link of line of questions here. Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you, Mayor. Mohan, obviously, bigger CCOs like Bay Venues will have to consult with Tauranga City Council about their borrowing program. What's the threshold when they have to check back in to council?
It'll be all approved by council. They'll have no choice to go directly to LGFA. So upfront, council will have to approve and also set up the structure where they've got capital or guarantee from us. So it's really an upfront thing which allows them to borrow directly from LGFA. But at this stage, we're not planning to do that. So that's still coming within our covenants as well. So if they go and borrow some money from LGFA, then our borrowing capacity is reduced. So it's just really done together. Yes, it's really also designed to allow Dunedin's City Council is one of them that has got this holding company structures that we've had for a number of years. So that allows them to be part of LGFA where they can't structure. That's one of the reasons going back 2, 3 years. So expectation is that post June 30, they become part of the rest of the council. There's 67 councils need to sign these agreements, just about all of them. All the councils, most of the councils in there. Yes.
Thank you for that.
Very good. Let's just think who's dropped out of this. Larry, I think you're next.
Thank you, Tammy. Mohan, just further to that question of Steve's, they would still need our approval to borrow, but would it impact on our two-way loan agreement? Would we not manage it in that way? They would need our approval, they need our support underwriting, but would they then go and directly borrow, or would we still have that two-way loan agreement?
I think we will still have the two-way loan agreement. It's there to sort of manage week to week as well. For example, we have cash flows. When they got cash flows on a certain date, we'll fund them. And when they've got surplus cash, they repay the loan. That loan agreement goes up and down every week, basically. So we manage it that way. So it's cheaper for them to do that than go to have a bank with an overdraft facility or with a capital facility. So that's why we have that. In a bigger amount sense, you could, if they were part of LGFA, they could borrow the larger amounts as another two-way loan agreement, therefore manage the sort of the short-term stuff.
So if supplementary, if they were doing a major development at Bay Park requiring debt funding, do they get the same borrowing rates through us as opposed to going direct to the LGFA?
Yeah, any new borrowing to the CCOs or the parent council should be at the same rate. There might be a real small margin if they have to do extra work, but they'll put their sort of controls, LGFA put controls in place into the monitoring and all that in place. So I expect it'll be similar to us borrowing at this stage. They haven't sort of set up concrete rate yet, but I expect to be. What they normally do is that what they borrow from the market and adds a margin for the overheads, and then another margin for the credit quality of the parent council. So that's how they do it now.
Very good, Mohan. Thank you very much. Kelvin, you had a question.
Yeah, thanks, Mohan. I think it's pretty much been answered, but your paragraph 4B, talking about the LGFA will be testing at the group level rather than the parent level. So that group level in our case would be, for example, a CCO BVL. That's what that group level refers to.
Correct. At the moment, we have agreement in place that we take BVL's external revenue to part of our total. So we have that agreement that it'll be the same. And the other thing that will come into there will be if BVL has some external debt outside of us. If there was some that had in the past small amounts, that will be the other thing. So it'd be the group external debt rather. Yeah.
Okay. No, that's good. Thanks for clarifying that.
One other clarification I'd like to make in terms of, it notes there that the shareholders agreement, it's paragraph 3, item 3, there's an LGFA's, there's a shareholders agreement which has been approved previously, but it's intended that it will be signed, or LGFA will execute that at the same time these documents get dated and executed. Just a clarification there.
Thanks for that.
Thank you, Mohan. Councillors, any other questions of Mohan? There being no...
I just have one question of clarification. So what you're saying is if they borrow directly, we still have to give approval, but it does still sit on our balance sheet. Is that correct?
It will sit on our consolidated balance sheet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. Any other questions, councillors?
Yeah, I might just add one more, if I may, just because of the circumstances that we're in, Mohan, we see from all of the documents attached to all of this, the kind of extent that we have to go to make any amendments to this agreement, with every council having 2 people signing it and so on. Is this the same scenario that would need to occur if there was a move to change the debt to revenue ratio requirements within the LGFA funding agreements?
It's correct. And also the Crown also there as well. Crown will also, as a shareholder, if they own 20%, they'll also have to sign as well. It is quite challenging when you have to get 60 odd councils to agree at something sometimes.
Except perhaps in a crisis such as the COVID-19 crisis, maybe.
Yeah, that's right. It's always good. A crisis, creates opportunities.
Thank you, Mohan. That may be the understatement of the year, that your last one, getting 60 councils to agree on something. Anyway, councillors, any more questions of Mohan? Thank you. There being no further questions, I'll call for a mover and a seconder.
Happy to move.
Thank you, John. And a seconder.
Second.
Thank you, Jaco. John, any comment?
No, I think it's a good report. It's clear it provides some advantages and it's well explained by Mohan. So 3 ticks from me.
Very good. Thank you, Jaco.
Likewise, I think it's a common sense just to approve and move forward with this.
Very good. Thank you very much. I'll call then. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Again? Any abstentions? Carried, Council. Thank you very much. Moving now on to 10.6. Dog registration fees report. Sam, I'm assuming you're with us and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Me, Tembi, I'm happy to provide an introduction to this report. It's Barbara here. And,
Barbara, thank you very much.
By way of introduction, the Dog Control Act does require council to set fees by resolution as opposed to through the annual plan and the fees and charges manual. Dogs are required to be registered as at the 1st of July, so it's timely to set fees now. That allows the team time to advertise the fees as they're required to under the legislation and issue notices. You'll note in the report there are a range of options under the Act for council to consider when setting fees. This council has previously resolved to set the 2 fees, one for all dogs and the 150% for dangerous dogs. This report, we're not proposing any changes to that this year, but could in the future, recognising that if we do lower fees for any sector of dog owners, then other owners have to pay more to meet the revenue and financing policy. Sam has identified in the report a historic concern regarding the quantum of the revenue budget and our inability to meet that given the current fees. When we first started writing this report, it was our intentions to recommend increasing those fees to reduce the gap in that the budget to what we've received, but given the current environment, we think it's prudent to recommend that we stay with the same fees and that the team endeavour to ensure that all dogs are registered and any opportunities to generate revenue are taken in the 12-month period. So I'm not sure if Sam is here. He probably is. So either Sam or I can take questions.
Thank you very much, Barbara. We have a question from Larry.
Thanks, Barbara and Sam. We had a couple of questions that we forwarded in before the meeting just to get some preparation on. I wonder if you can address those in regard to how much of the animal control team work is taken up by dogs as opposed to cats, rats, and crocodiles. Well, I'll let you answer that one first, I think.
I hadn't seen that question, but my gut feeling is that the animal control team would spend the majority, if not 95% of their time on dogs. Stock in a urban area like ours would be a very small part of their workload. Cats, while we do have traps that people can come and use, we don't have any legislative responsibility for cats, so I'm hoping that we don't do any work.
Larry, you had a second part to that question, I think.
Yeah, I think the other part was, well, Bill might want to ask the question himself. I know he raised it about how we pay during this difficult time. Some people may want to see if there's other graduated payments. I'll leave it to Bill to bring it up.
Thank you. Thanks, Larry. Bill, fire away.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. Look, Barbara, just in regards to the possibility of, say, monthly payments rather than the yearly payment, could that possibly be done? It's just to ease the pain, I think, for some of these people. And I'll tell you what, now around this pandemic, certainly there's a lot of people talking to their dogs. For those that are quite lonely and they have dogs as a company, that's what they often do. So I'm just trying to see if we could possibly help things a little here with regards to that.
Yeah, Councillor, I certainly understand the concern. From a legislative perspective, a dog isn't registered. It's not registered until a full fees are paid. So, and it is required to be registered by the 1st of July. We know that a lot of people don't, and we do on a case-by-case basis allow people to pay us off, the fee off. I wouldn't want to extend it to a full year, but certainly if people are having problems, we can talk to them on a one-on-one basis.
Well, tell me if I'm wrong there. Yes, I understood there was one or two other councils throughout New Zealand that do allow that and pay on a monthly basis, and I just wonder if we could sort of align with what they do.
Okay, Councillor, we could investigate it. I'm not aware of any councils that do. I am aware of councils that allow people to forward pay so that they can be registered as at the 1st of July, but I'm not aware of any councils that provide that service. But we certainly can investigate it, and as I said, if people are having problems, we will work with them.
Thank you, Barbara. Very much appreciated. Marty, I think you might have had a query.
No, actually, I think payment means, and that's probably a question for Paul, but I understand he was on the phone. I'm not sure whether he's picked up on the threads of the question or not.
I have as much knowledge that it's about a dog. That's about it. All I know. Sorry. If you could repeat the question, I'm happy to answer it.
Oh.
He's got the dog.
He's barking mad. Won't say who.
I think in response, let's look at it and we can report back perhaps next week at the Finance and Audit and Risk Committee as to the possibility of paying by instalments.
Great, thank you, Marty.
Thanks, Marty.
Thank you for the question, Bill. Councillors, any more questions of Barbara?
Happy to move if there are none.
Yeah, Larry, thank you very much. Can I have a seconder, please?
Yep, I'll second that. Tina?
Tina, thank you very much. Larry?
Just quickly speaking to it, I appreciate Barbara's explanation as to why we have to pass this resolution in the midst of a COVID-19 crisis. And I hope the public will understand, I hope the press will treat us kindly, that we're not having an emergency meeting here to set our dog registration fees. I think it's obvious we wouldn't want to increase them at this time, as you can imagine what the headlines would say. But it is to be noted that we are carrying the costs by rate subsidy, by rate top up there, and at some point this is the sort of thing that ought to be covered by these fees. It should be user pays and so on, so we'll have to address it at some point, but definitely not in the middle of a crisis like this. And as Bill said, these dogs provide enormous comfort to many people in our community.
Thank you, Larry. Tina?
No, nothing to add.
Thank you very much. Councillors, I'll put to you then the excuse me, the resolutions as detailed before you. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Against? Any abstentions? Carried. Thank you very much. Which moves us on to 10.7, which is the new bus shelter update. So, is Philip?
Nick is online. I can.
Sorry. Thank you.
Pip will be available as the subject matter expert if there are any questions. But this is just a brief update on the bus shelters and where that's at. There is a keen interest historically from council, and we had by now expected to have a hearing for the ones that were objected to. So we just thought we'd give you an update. Basically, just stating a continuation of the ones that are unopposed, and for us to set a hearing for the ones, hearing time for the ones that are opposed. So that's the reason for the update, and happy to take any questions on that.
Thank you very much, Nick. Councillors, any questions of Nick?
Yeah, got a question.
Thank you, Kelvin.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. In terms of people complaining about the placement of bus shelters, is there a threshold that we, take, or just does one person have to complain and then it goes to this hearings process?
It's the person that has got the property adjacent to the bus shelter. That's the extent. Just one person. Yeah. That's the extent of the consultation. Yes.
And it can't be extended beyond.
And they can oppose to it, and will then, through the Local Government Act, have an opportunity to be heard as to the reasons why. So that's why we need to set these hearings. So there are. We've got 12 already installed or underway. We've got another 12 yeses, and then we have 10 or so. They are on the appended schedule, but I think there's about 10. I haven't got that in front of me now, that are opposed. So those 10 will be given the opportunity for a hearing. And my assumption is that we could do that under an alert level 2, but I need to follow up with democracy services on that. But we had a council meeting in Chambers, we're under alert level 2.
Thanks very much, Nick. Sorry, Larry, for jumping in ahead of you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nick. Larry,
no problem.
Larry, followed by Heidi.
Nick, just querying the kind of hearing that we have. Is it like an annual plan? They come in, they say their piece, we decide, or is there a quasi-judicial aspect to it, like a dog hearing or whatever? Is there criteria by which we have to decide, or because this could go on? I'm just wondering what kind of hearing.
Well, it is a hearing where they state the reasons as to why it is opposed, and should you disagree with that, just in terms of the greater public good that a bus shelter in those localities could provide, then that is your call. You could also ask us to look at other localities.
Okay, so there's no right.
Of course, this is in partnership with the.
Sorry, Nick, didn't mean to cut in there. I'm just testing if there's any rights of appeal if we then decide, no, it's in the public interest. That's the end of the matter, is it?
As far as I know, I might have to ask if Pip is with us and can give us some guidance on that.
So, Nick, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
You just dropped out for me then, that last one. What's happening now? What did you want to do?
I asked if Pip was online and could give us a steer on that, on whether the council call could be challenged.
I see.
She hasn't dropped in here, so she may not be online. So it might be something that I will have to come back to you on when we decide the time for that hearing.
Okay, Nick,
with
thank
a bit
you.
more of advice on the process around it.
No, so Pip is online, but she can't hear the question. Pip, are you able to speak? Can we hear you, or are you not able to be heard at all? No, I think she has a.
We can report back next week on process details.
Yep, thank you very much, Marty. Coral, I can just tell you that Coral has very helpfully just explained that it is a hearing under the Local Government Act 1974. Council can dismiss objection or decide not to proceed with the proposal to erect a bus shelter. Thank you, Coral. Does that satisfy an answer to the question?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Larry. As I recall, Heidi, you were next.
Hi, thanks, Nick. It's great to hear that's all being progressed and it's being prioritised at the moment to hopefully get a few in before winter. What is the opportunity for when there's a certain number of them that are held up in hearings for casting the net out wider to find ones that are, because obviously we need sort of what 100 and how many bus shelters are we after in all, and is there are we progressing all of the ones that we can within the framework of our budgets and timing for this year?
Yes, we are. I do so. The numbers that I referred to earlier. So there's about, I think all up, there's about 40, 12 already installed, 10 objected to. We've got 12 yeses, and then there are a few that are in a grey zone in the middle, where we have been able to make contact, but haven't been able to close out the yes or the no's because COVID came in between.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillors, any more questions of Nick? There being no further discussion, I will put the motion to you. All those. Sorry, did we have a?
Happy to move. Happy to move, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Steve. And a second, please. Sorry, who was that?
Andrew. I'll second.
Andrew, thank you. Steve, did you have any further discussion?
Yeah, very briefly. We've had reported incidences last year of some of our elder residents getting caught up in the rain, particularly in winter, because we just haven't been able to provide a bus shelter for them. So this is going to be really crucial to deliberate and get on with. Thank you.
Very good. Hear, hear. Thank you, Steve. Andrew?
No, I don't need to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion, councillors? There being none, I'll put the motion to you. All those in favour, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say no. Any abstentions? Carried. Thank you very much. We're on to 10.8, CCO half-yearly reports. Gareth, I'll get you to speak to this, please. Thank you.
Kia ora, Mayor. Just along the lines of Barbara's intro, this seems like a strange time to be talking about CCOs and things of this nature, but we have some procedural and some legislative requirements that we need to address. And I'll hand over to Anne Blakeway that has a lot more of the detail than I do.
Lovely. Thank you, Gareth. Thanks, Anne.
Thanks, Gareth. Hello, everybody. So I've combined 3 reports into one reports. So the first report is just receiving the CCO's half-yearly reports that we're obliged to do under the Local Government Act, and all the detail is in the attachment. And as Gareth said, it seems a bit bizarre now, really, considering, and we're fully expecting that the second half of the financial year, the CCOs will obviously not be meeting their targets because of COVID, but we are obliged to receive those half-yearly reports. The second report is around the draft statements of intent. So that is what our CCOs are planning to do for the next financial year. And again, we drafted some feedback to those. And again, it seems kind of slightly irrelevant now in light of COVID. So I have put a note there and said, while this report outlines shareholder feedback to the draft statements of intent, it's expected that the CCOs will need to revise their statement of intents and financial and non-financial targets in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So basically, our CCOs will be asked to virtually rewrite their statements of intent with much revised financial forecasts. So that's what they're working on now, but we still have to receive the drafts under the Local Government Act. And then the third report is requesting an increase to the two-way loan agreement. So this is kind of following on a little bit from Mohan's report. So we have to give BVL approval. And so they've done some financial forecasting, which has shown that their loan balance would reach 21.3 million by 30th of June. And this has taken into consideration some funding from central government towards wages in the wage subsidy scheme. But just to give them the necessary flexibility, we're asking if we can extend that loan agreement up to 25 million and to allow BVL to work with what's happening with COVID. But this is subject to them working with us on a week-by-week basis on their financial forecasts, and also subject to TCC being able to remain within its Treasury policy limits. So there are some conditions attached to that. So happy to answer any questions. The individual reports are submitted as attachments, but happy to answer questions.
And Anne, it also relies on delegation to the Emergency Committee.
So that is just an extra step, just in case there has to be a further increase.
Right, thank you very much. Members, any questions of Anne or Gareth? Thank you.
I have a question, Anne. I was just wanting to know the time frame. It says it's asking for a short-term increase. What does short-term mean? How long is that?
So the increase would be in place and it would be reviewed following the approval of the annual plan. So listening to earlier in the meeting, it sounds like that might be in July. Originally, that would have been the 30th of June. So just it would be reviewed again after that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tina. Thank you, Anne. Councillors, any further questions of Anne? Thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to seek a mover in a second, but I just wonder, first of all, I imagine that some may want A through C taken and D taken separately. Is that correct? Or are you happy to have all four recommendations taken in one resolution?
Excuse me, Mayor Tenby.
Yes,
are we, sorry, Kelvin here. Sorry, are we looking at each, because there are three separate reports by my understanding, are we supposed to be going through each one separately?
Well, not as I have it here. I mean, if you look at B of the recommendations, it's to receive the half-yearly reports from all the CCOs as detailed, and which we have to do. We have a requirement to do that. I guess what I was questioning was your the appetite for D included within A, B, and C, or whether councillors would prefer to have a separate vote on D?
Well,
Sorry,
for
we've got several.
responses, for responses, I think D is, makes good sense. It's still under our control. I'm happy for it to go ahead, but if there is anyone wanting to vote against it, I guess that's where they need to have the opportunity to.
I had a question in that case.
Thank you, Kelvin. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So in relation to that two-way agreement, loan agreement, there's been some commentary over many years, in fact, from some perhaps financially literate residents who claim that although our operating grants are very stable to BVL, the inter-company loan seems to grow year on year. Therefore, we're not truly showing the true cost of operating our facilities through BVL. So that's really a question. I'm not sure whether, Anne, you're able to answer that, or someone like Paul might be able to answer that concern that some do raise within our community before we put the vote, particularly for the increase of that two-way loan agreement. Thank you.
I think Councillor Robson has asked that in previous years as well, and we are asking BVL to reflect that in their annual reports going forwards, to reflect the true funding that they receive from TCC, not just the operating grant, but the renewals and capital funding.
So does Paul have any view on that? Or thank you.
Can I comment on that, councillors? It's Mohan here.
Thanks,
Just
yes, please.
That loan agreement will go up as you approve new capital. So that's how it's gone up in the past. So any project or capital they wish to do, which they funded from their non-rate funded activity, initially the debt will go up to fund that, and over time it'll get repaid. So that's why it would go up. It's the only reason.
So supplementary, that's not relating then to operational expenditure, just capital.
Just capital, but any operation deficits will fall into there as well. For example, if this year there will be a potential deficit, potentially, that would fall into that loan agreement as they fund from us.
But it'll be reflected in their financial report, which is important that we see that and analyse it.
Yes, correct.
But Mohan, just to be clear on this, the operating isn't going to be added to the quantum of the loan. Is that correct?
Well, if there is a deficit this year, that's the only way they can fund it unless we give them rates grant.
Sorry, I understand that. If there is a deficit, sure. Okay, understand.
Thank you. It's important.
Right, thank you. Councillors, any other questions?
Can I supplementary to that?
Thank you, Larry.
So Mohan, you just explained it pretty clearly, but the issue about whether there's some smoke and mirrors going on here would relate to who's repaying the debt. If they borrow money and they repay the debt, even if it's in this situation where they have deficit and they need to borrow, that's where it begins to hide or perhaps mask how much council is actually contributing to them. Can you comment on that?
Yes, we collect depreciation for their assets, and any new assets they build, they pay us the depreciation amount, and we collect it, and we use that for the debt retirement of their loan. And then you'll see in the next annual plan, it'll be an amount to retire debt going through. Again, that's funded from the depreciation reserve.
Thank you.
Question from me.
Thank you, Jaco.
So with the updated LGFA agreement, this two-way loan will become redundant?
As I said earlier, they're probably needed for a short-term cash management. With LGFA, usually it happens a monthly or a 6-weekly, their drawdowns, their bond tenders. So I think it'll still be required to manage week-to-week stuff.
Yeah, but it'll be quite a small quantum compared to what it is at the moment.
It can be, if council decides longer term that BVL can borrow directly, yes, could be a smaller amount.
Thank you, Jaco, and for your answer, Mohan. Councillors, any other questions of Mohan before I put this to the vote?
I have just one question. Do other CCOs have the same two-way loan facility with us?
We have got a small arrangement with Bockless, which as they require funding in the short term, we provide them funding as like a working capital overdraft way. That's the only one. At the moment, the balances, we haven't any drawdowns or, and if they have surplus funds, they could invest with us too. So at the moment, it's zero.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mohan, and for your question, Tina. Councillors, any other questions of Anne or Mohan?
Yeah, yes, please. And John as well.
Sorry, Kelvin, it's you and then followed by John. Thank you.
John first, actually.
Thank you. John, far away.
Thank you, Kelvin. You're a gentleman at the ripe old age of 57 in one day.
Good on you, mate.
It's just to be clear, Mohan, so for clarification, the next report we see from BVL will identify, if you like, 3 clear, at least, sources of debt. One being their debt to us, another potentially being their debt to the LGFA, and a third tranche of debt, which would be debt to other sources of funding that they've taken or finance that they've taken from other sources. Would that be correct? So there'll be 3?
It will be correct if council decides they can go direct to the LGFA. That decision is not made yet. If that's the case, it will be exactly right. 3 sources.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Kelvin.
Yeah, thank you. So the question from me, and I guess Mohan should be able to answer this, is paragraph 28 of page 43 of our agenda. And in relation to BVL again, they seem to get the most sort of attention from us. It talks there about changing the reporting from EBITDA to net profit after tax. I recall the previous chair of BVL, Peter Farmer, used to quite fondly talk about EBITDA and was very proud of the fact that there had been some improvement in that over the years. So is there any, can you just explain to the average layperson the key difference between EBITDA and net profit after tax?
I think Anne might be better to answer that one.
Yep, happy to answer this one. So this again has come as feedback from staff and trying to ask BVL to be more consistent with the other CCOs in showing their net profit after tax, because sometimes the EBITDA figure doesn't reflect the true picture.
And it would be fair to say that BVL has, because of their asset base, an extraordinary amount of depreciation as compared to the others. And therefore, by adding that in, the DAR part of the, or the D part of the EBITDA, particularly, you're changing an awful lot that would make, that would not give an accurate comparison. So I imagine the NPAT is all around finding that level of comparison.
It's showing both figures.
Thank you. I think John had some. Yeah, thank you, John. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelvin. John.
Yeah, just to be clear, it's really a comment. I mean, earnings before interest and tax and depreciation amortization is a very, very different number to NPAT. And again, it comes back to just getting transparency for our community. They're not familiar with what those numbers mean and often interpret it as some sort of profit. So having both, I think, helps make that clear. It's just transparency. So this is a good move.
Thank you.
Agree entirely, John. Thank you very much. Councillors, any further questions?
Yes.
Who was that, sorry?
It's Larry, yes.
Larry, thank you.
Just in further clarification of what Kelvin raised earlier, it's been suggested that there's some masking of reality going on between shares, ownership of shares, values of shares, and revaluing of the assets that BVL hold that somehow hides or covers the real cost that we're carrying. Can you speak to that, Mohan?
Yeah, no, I absolutely no hiding of anything. I'm absolutely convinced there's nothing like that at all. I mean, it's clearly stayed out in the BVL accounts and then flows on to our consolidated accounts, or even look at the parent council accounts. You see the investment in subsidiaries. You can clearly key that in the notes of the accounts. It's pretty transparent from an accountant point of view.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohan. And again, thank you, Larry. Any more questions, councillors?
Yeah, I've got one more. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelvin. I knew you would.
Yeah, thank you. This is just to give BVL a bit of a rest. If we look at Tourism Bay of Plenty, clearly the whole COVID-19 issue is massively impacting on tourism. So, and to what extent is Tourism Bay of Plenty going to be re-looking at their whole strategy, their whole financial position for years to come? So what are they actually doing about addressing that and bringing something back to us?
Well, that in a way, that's where the earlier report that went to council, where we were asking for guidance from you on that. And obviously that helps TBOP then rewrite their statement of intent. They want to know from us what we're wanting from them. So the destination management strategy is still really relevant, in fact, more relevant than ever. International tourism is obviously pretty much on hold for the next 2 years. Domestic tourism is going to become more and more important. So just like all of the CCOs, they'll be in this period of recovery. It may be important to start relooking at the conference market. There's lots of opportunities, and those are the sort of things that Tourism Bay of Plenty are looking at right now. But it's also up to us to help give them some steer on that.
Thank you. So supplementary.
We'll include that consideration in that piece of work we talked about earlier.
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you, Marty. Kelvin, before you go to your supplementary, I can shed a bit of light on this as well to add to Anne. And I think week 1 it was, or thereabouts, so I did call Kristen and say, what is the plan to change the destination management strategy to an absolute domestic focus? She reports, as Anne suggested, that they have done that proactively anyway. They're looking forward to presenting that to us, but reminded me that the vast majority of our tourism is domestically based anyway. Of the $1.1 billion we get from tourism, extract from tourism in the Western Bay of Plenty, only 90 million come from cruise, as in cruise ships, and the vast majority of that revenue is based on domestic inbound anyway. The plan, and I think it's a good plan that she's going to present to council, is all around making us New Zealand, but fall back in love with the region, and the idea is Western Bay of Plenty, and then as the levels, we drop down the levels to encourage greater New Zealanders to come to the Bay of Plenty, based on it being more than just a beach. So I think it's I think she's well considered, and she looks forward to presenting it.
No, that's great. That covers my supplementary. I was just going to find out when she's going to be doing that. Look forward to hearing from Kristen. Okay, thank you very much.
Sooner rather than later is my view, because it's necessary to think about this in some detail and give them support. John, I think if I've got this right, you had a question.
Yeah, thank you, Tembi. Tembi, you may have a better read on this than anyone else, because you're the guy that's in Wellington or talking to Wellington most often. But I've got some, and it's in the TBOP area. Are they thinking about, or is there any central government view on basically the regions now spending an enormous amount of money competing with each other for domestic tourism, which becomes a zero-sum game, although advertising agencies will benefit and tourism bodies will benefit, but actually we're just shuffling dollars around New Zealand. Is that going to be addressed in the reports to us? And the central government got a view on this?
It's a very good question. Kristen, together with her counterparts in the destination management tourism entities, are working with Tourism New Zealand on exactly this and a lot more. And you're right. I mean, what is the point of trying to compete and throw money at all the regions for them to compete with each other? There could be a way of working collaboratively. So that's a good point, and that was in fact part of the subject of the last conversation I had with her. So I have been staying naturally close to this because it is so important to us. And look, the TBOP team are great. I've worked with them on 2 different occasions now very closely, Whaikari and something else. I don't know what it was now. Goodness. Anyway, they're a good team, and I think they'll come back to us with a really good plan for us to consider.
Happy to move.
I'm not sure. Thank you, Larry. And a seconder, please.
And that'll be A, B, C, and D.
Right, and a seconder for Larry's motion, which is taking A through D all in one tranche.
Thank you
very much, John. Larry, any discussion? Just lost you, Larry.
sorry, I think we've covered it all. There's behind this resolution, there's 3 very good reports, and I think it's all covered there well.
Thank you very much. John, any further points?
No, I agree with Larry.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. And that being the case, all those in favour, say aye.
Aye.
Any against? And any abstentions? Thank you, Councillor. That is carried. Which moves us, just bear with me one moment, I'll flick some pages and screens. On to the discussion of late items, which we have in fact already done after your concession and agreement to change the order of business. That being the case, I will now call for a mover and a seconder to go into the public excluded session, adjourning this part of the meeting.
I'll move that.
Thank you, Tina. And a seconder, please.
Second that. Yep, Kelvin.